So cool. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Basically, just to give you a quick background on this whole thing. So I am from South Africa. I've worked in the United States for a couple of years, or I was in the United States for a couple of years, and I've moved to London about a year and a half ago after selling my my first startup that I started and sold in South Africa. And that business operated across the whole of Africa. It was South Africa's and Africa's largest career guidance platform. And so I had a lot of experience working in Africa. And I subsequently moved to the UK really just for a bit of a change and to kind of see a new landscape and experience what Europe was all about. And what I've been kind of surprised with is the interest that UK businesses have had in doing business in Africa, whether for the purposes of hiring remote teams or expanding to Africa, or just otherwise doing business in Africa. And kind of all these questions have been thrown at me over the last year or two, a year and a half or so. And it turns out that the guys at Kaomi have had a similar experience with people throwing questions at them. And yeah, so we've teamed up to start QCX, which is this endeavor. So we're doing a series of webinars and an excursion and a few other things, really to kind of educate UK businesses about doing business in Africa. And so that's really kind of how we got together and put the QCX events together. So just quick 2 cents from my side before I hand over to Duan. I wanted to just point out that quite interestingly, after spending some time working in the UK now, it's very clear to me that Africa is should be very attractive for UK businesses. There's just drastically lower costs across really the whole of Africa as compared to Europe and in particular the UK or London. There's a completely underserviced population. There just aren't sort of sufficient or sophisticated products and services that are being offered to the African population. There's a completely underutilized workforce. Which interestingly is, in my opinion, much more driven and resilient than the status quo in a lot of Europe and the West. And I think part of that is just the background that is just the background that Africans are coming from means that they really have to have a lot more drive and determination and resilience to get anywhere. And of course, it's just crazy, stunningly beautiful. It's very practical for traveling. Not much of a time difference, cheap to get back and forth. So it's just a really interesting topic, and we thought we'd bring this to you guys to kind of share our knowledge on this. And again, that's why how Kaomi and I and myself have started working together to bring this to you guys. Today, we're going to do a primer, really, short snippets on all about doing business in Africa. So we're going to have 3 knowledgeable speakers come and give a sort of 10-minute primer each, and you have an opportunity to ask each of them questions. That's Suyayi, Philani, Sangweni, and Simon Magner. I'll introduce them as they arrive. So let me just quickly hand over to Duan Chapman, who is the co-founder of Kaomi and the guys coordinating this whole thing. Duan?
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for that intro, Jason. So yeah, as Jason said, my name is Duan Chapman. I'm one of the co-founders of Kaomi Marketing. And so I guess one of the main questions would be, why are we doing this QCX webinar and event? And so the first thing is really just to share the knowledge that we have. So for a little bit about Kaomi Marketing, we have a business in South Africa and one in the UK. So like Jason said, we've been asked quite a few questions from our clients that we've worked with and helped across these regions to launch into equal region. And so with that understanding, we've got a lot of this knowledge, and yeah, we just want to share it and really help businesses. It also takes us to point number 2, which is to contribute to the economic prosperity of Africa. Obviously, our business was based in South Africa, and that's where our base was before we moved to the UK. And so by assisting UK businesses coming into Africa, we obviously assisting the African economy and stimulating it, as well as helping with job opportunity. And yeah, on that point, we also have started a pledge where through the initiatives of QCX, we want to assist in generating 100 jobs within Africa in this next year through all of these events and webinars. And yeah, we just love everyone that joins this QCX events and going through the excursion to assist with this pledge. And to really buy into it and drive that inside this year. There is going to be more details on this based on a link that we'll send out after this webinar. But yeah, that's like the main reason why we are doing this stuff. And then the plan going forward for QCX, as Jason said, this is our first webinar. We're really just trying to test the waters here. But we'd love to have more of these webinars and get more people on it to be able to communicate and share our knowledge. But we also want to do a boots on the ground excursion, which is a real experience inside South Africa to Cape Town, to get people to understand the culture, experience business on the ground, get access to our networks and trusted partners through facilitated intros, which will really just help businesses from the UK launch into Africa and specifically South Africa, which would be a game changer for those businesses. And again, we'll talk more about this at the end of the webinar and explain more as we send the links out. But yeah, just before I hand back to Jason, I spoke about Kaomi marketing in the beginning, and it's the driving force to QCX. So a little bit about our agency. We're based in Africa, in South Africa and the UK. We focus on paid media, SEO, and analytics. And like I said, we have clients across both regions, and we've helped them launch into either region, as well as growing being the leaders inside their own spaces. So if you want anything more from that side, you want to have any conversations around that or specifics around those clients, the details of how they've launched and the success they've had, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or get my details after this, and I'd be more than happy to have a discussion around it and offer any advice or support we can from that side. So yeah, that's pretty much everything from us. I'm going to pass back to Jason.
Cool. Okay, so I'm just going to crack out the whiskey here because it's Thursday and it's London, so let's do it. So yeah, as you guys can kind of tell, this is meant to be like a kind of casual discourse of like our knowledge. So like, feel free to interrupt at any time with questions or comments or whatever you have. So before I jump onto the advisory stuff and before Hannah comes on to speak, I just wanted to point out that part of our aspiration here is to help you guys, practically speaking, to do business in either region, and to introduce you to really like facilitate intros to the right people that you need to know in any particular region. So we've in order to kind of just help you take the plunge, if you're struggling on the legal side, you're literally just not sure how to get technically set up in the other country, that's what we're here for. If you are not sure about where to hire, or like where to find the right talent, or what kinds of sectors you might like, you might know a couple of salespeople, and you kind of feel comfortable hiring salespeople in the region, but not perhaps tech people or engineers. We can hook you up with the right people who can help you find those people. So really, just we're trying to just discourse our knowledge, facilitate intros, and there's a couple ones I just wanted to mention, a couple of partners of ours. The one is Iridium Business Solutions. You're actually going to hear from a co-founder of Iridium Business Solutions later today. His name's Simon. So they're an accounting, advisory, and automation business, and just like the most epic people to help you from a practical standpoint. I was looking tax, finance, accounting, legally, just getting your company up and running, set up, catering to the differences between the UK and Africa or wherever you happen to be operating. So that's Iridium Business Solutions, epic. We'd be happy to introduce you to them if you need. The other is O'Reilly Law. Our legal partners, they do commercial law, and quite honestly, they'll just help you with kind of any problem that you have. They've been very helpful for me, both in my personal legal endeavors, not too many of those, and commercially for, I don't know, a decade plus. And also the founder of O'Reilly Law, Jack O'Reilly, more than happy to do introductions to you. And these are guys that we've all been working with for a long time, so they'll actively help you if we kind of facilitate those intros. And the last is DGE Recruit. Doug's here with us now, the founder of DGE Recruit. He has helped me find some of my most successful employees in my own business endeavors, and he's just hooked up in all the right places, particularly in the tech world, but really kind of across the board. So particularly when looking for talent in South Africa and Africa, generally speaking, Doug's a great guy to be in touch with. Cool. So before we move into Hannah, which Tyler, if you're there, if you could drop her a message, that'd be great. A few 2 cents from my side. So as I said, or kind of setting the table, if you will, I have I started a startup. So my experience is more on the kind of, is less on the corporate side, and zero in the public sector, and all at the kind of early stage startup to medium size startup world, or startup kind of size. And I wanted to point out a few things. The first is that in my experience, Africa is just ripe with opportunity that I'm not yet confident that most people in the UK fully understand. And the reason for that is just because very little has been done. Now that I've spent a year and change in the UK, just everything's been done. To create a 10x better product or service is really a tall order, because so much has already been done here. Whereas in Africa, I mean, very few things have been done. So there's a lot of opportunity in Africa, and for that reason, it's definitely something you should be looking at. Hey, Hannah, we'll get you in 1 second. The second thing is talent. The talent in Africa, perhaps contrary to popular belief, is like really good. I mean, there are really smart and educated people across Africa, and my perspective is that because most people in Africa do not come from wealth, and because job fluidity across Africa is not commonplace, you can't just hop from one high-paying job to another high-paying job. People really care. They really kind of give a shit about doing a good job and moving up in the world. Versus, again, this is all my own experience and opinions, but versus in the UK, if you're in London and you're, a somewhat educated person, who's somewhat competent, you can kind of job hop and get by and pay your rent, whether or not you put in a lot of effort into your jobs. So for those reasons, I think there's a heck of a lot of talent in Africa that is just underutilized to the maximum degree. And this, I think, has a lot of implications for hiring remote teams across Africa. So again, something that should certainly be considered. So I'll pause there. Those are two my sort of insights. I want to quickly hand across to Hannah. So just to give Hannah a quick introduction. So Hannah Suyayi is an angel, a venture and private equity investor working across the full spectrum of the investment landscape. She's based in Kinshasa in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and in Cape Town, South Africa, and I don't know, 200 other places as well, most probably. I think you said you're in the DRC at the moment. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Hi, everyone. Very pleased to be with you guys tonight, and very happy to be able to share my African experience from both a professional and personal angle. So I am currently in the Gulf of Kinshasa, where we are actually meeting a UK investment professional. So once we are done with the presentation and the Q&A session, I will just move around in the room so that you can see him. His name is William Phelps. He's investing from a fund which is called Adaverse, which is part of Cardano, which is a Web3 blockchain kind of related investment. So to show you that DRC, despite the bad negative picture that you get in the media, is also quite futuristic, or definitely involved in the latest trends when it comes to technology and development. And that's definitely the type of ideas that I want you to leave when we will be done with the session. So my name is Hannah Suyayi Kamwanga, originally from DRC. When you see a Congolese person with a last name with a K, Kamwanga means that I'm coming from Lubumbashi, the mining area. We are smart, we are hot, we are leading the country. So yeah, that's how we roll. I actually grew up and did my schooling in France, in Paris, so with a degree in finance and a master degree in business law. And I started my career in investment banking in London. So very often you will find that some of the most prominent professionals here also have international careers and or background. And most Congolese people, we have experiences either in Belgium, France, some the UK, actually, the US, also South Africa. Nevertheless, you will also find, I don't like the word local people because I'm also local, but I would say Congolese people who have not left the country, who are also fluent in English and very interesting to do business with. Yes, the internet connection is not great. We are still working on deploying fiber in the country. So after a few years in investment banking, I decided to move back to Africa. It was always my dream to invest on my continent. And this is where I became an investment director in a private equity firm managing $1 billion based in Cape Town, between Cape Town and Mauritius. And I had the great opportunity to travel and invest all over the continent. Which is why Jason was mentioning that I spent I spent some time in Nigeria, Egypt, Kenya, Ghana, you name it. So after 7 years, I mean, it was fantastic. And my key takeaways from those years, doing business in various countries in Africa, is that, as you know, Africa it's like 54, 55-ish countries, depending on who you're asking the questions to. Different cultures, different mindset, even for me as an African person. I will just give you one example. And humbling exercise for me. So you can see I'm Congolese. We say Congolese people from DRC are Nigerian people without oil, speaking French, right? So you can see we are like talkative. We kind of shout when we speak, while we think we are talking the normal way. And I did my first business trip in Kenya, right, Nairobi. So let's say I had a sort of disagreement with the CEO of a company, and by the way, he was wrong. So obviously, I told him he was wrong in front of his team in a kind of firm way, because I felt he was condescending. But I could see that my answer was completely shocking to him. So that night, I spoke with my team and I was like, but what went wrong? Because I felt like the guy was really offended when I spoke, as if I had insulted him. Was my English not correct? Like, I'm confused. And then they were like, no, you were completely right. But the thing is, they are not used to see women speak in a sort of vocal way and manner. And the way you express yourself made him feel very uncomfortable and threatened. And I was like, oh, okay, interesting, because definitely this is not the message that I wanted to come across. But more importantly, I was like, okay, so I need to be flexible as an investor, and more importantly, as a business professional. Depending on the country in which I operate, I have to adapt the way I communicate, the way I express myself, because I'm exaggerating a bit, but if you go to a Nigerian context, if you're quiet and a bit, subdued, it is perceived as a weakness. So obviously you want to be loud as well. So anyway, these are just the small cultural differences that it's very important for you to understand when you come to do business in Africa. And my second take would be for you not to have a sort of top-down approach, thinking that, okay, I will do X, Y, Z, and I will have this outcome. Really come as first few days, you observe, you stay quiet, you listen how people talk, speak, express yourself, and then you will be able to adapt your style to make sure that you get to the objective that you want. So back to my Cape Town story, after 7 years, I started to be a bit frustrated because I wanted to invest a bit more in Francophone Africa and especially in DRC. So when, again, through a headhunter, I had the opportunity to go back home in DRC to head the French Development Finance Institution, PROPARCO. PROPARCO is the equivalent of BII/CDC in the UK. So, like your development finance institution. So I moved back and I've been here professionally for 2 years. And through my mandate as a country manager, I have the opportunity to focus on impact investments from infrastructure, private equity, venture capital, and I would even say ecosystem building kind of initiatives as well. So it's very passionate, lots of ups and downs. You will see companies with net profits of $20-30 million who don't have an accounting system. And when you ask for the financial statements, it brings you books manually written. But then you obviously need to take that into account in the way you do business. Obviously, everything is not perfect. So if I have to highlight some of the issues that we have in the DRC that can be also prevalent in some other countries, obviously the tax situation. right? Always a bit tricky how to deal with the tax authorities, the financial statements, right? Even in Egypt, we know that there are 3 books. The first books that you show to the tax authorities saying, I don't have money. Then you have another book you show to your employees to say, I have a little bit of money, but that's why I pay you a little bit, because I just have a little bit of money. And then there is a third book that you show to your shareholders to say that actually we have a lot of money, that's why you have huge dividends, right? And you can imagine that in Egypt, using Arabic numbers, who knows what they're actually saying. So in DRC, you will also have this complexity of, I would say, information, quality of information. That's why human relationship is really key when you do business in Africa at the end of the day. If you get to know the people, both professionally and personally, if you have established this level of trust and this level of we want to grow together, then most of the time, I guess, you should be able to do good business. I don't know if I have answered all of your questions, or I don't know if you wanted me to highlight some other topics.
Yeah, Hannah, that's been super helpful. And I just wanted to mention that I didn't actually finish my full introduction of you, but the only thing I'll just quickly add was so I've had a lot of personal experience and spent a bit of time with Hannah. And not only is she quite obviously teeming with knowledge, but she's also an incredibly helpful person. So knowing Hannah is a good thing. And she's always been very helpful, like offering out intros, and she's a total badass.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that, like, actually, the UK embassy has kind of reopened activities in DRC, and they came to my office a few times. So if you want 2 or 3 contacts from the UK authorities here, I'm more than happy to do email introductions, assuming you want to do business in DRC.
Fantastic, Hannah. Yeah. Also, just to quickly update you that we are doing a pledge, or we're operating a pledge. We're basically facilitating UK businesses doing business in Africa with scope to create 100 jobs in Africa by the end of the year. So if you're any kind of help and intros would be much appreciated. Hannah, can I just throw a quick question at you before you head out, and maybe if anyone else has one, we can add maybe a second one. I just wanted to ask, do you have any particular advice on is there like a good starting point? Because as you mentioned, there are how many countries? There are 50-something countries in Africa, and each one differs culturally and from a legal standpoint and a variety of things. Do you think that there is a sort of like a one-size-fits-all or like an obvious starting point for UK businesses that want to do business in Africa? Should they go to a particular place, or does that really depend on what business they're trying to achieve? I think that might be the fiber issues. All right. Well, I guess we'll pause there with Hannah and give her a silent round of applause if she won't hear. And like I mentioned, we will be more than happy to put you in touch with Hannah if you come along to the excursion. Cool. Hannah, thank you if you can hear us, and we're gonna move on. So the next person that is going to be chatting, Philani, I see you join us. Good to see you, man. So Philani Sangweni is, can I say, a recovering INSEAD MBA. He's an entrepreneur and an investor at heart, who started out in banking and consulting at some of the continent's biggest institutions. He then served as the chief operating officer at one of South Africa's most highly regarded fintech companies, Fundi Capital. And he's worked in industries ranging from everything from financial services and consumer goods to minerals, energy, and the public sector. And he also co-founded E4E Africa, an active venture firm with multiple exits to its name. In spite of all of this, Philani is also one of the most humble and open people you could possibly hope to meet, which of course I only say because his former company acquired my startup. Philani is going to give us the primer on talent, human capital, and hiring in Africa, and possibly just any other thoughts and advice that he might have. So, Philani, over to you. Thanks for joining us, man.
Cool. You're welcome, Jason. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you. Yeah, I think my thoughts are really going to be based on my experience both advising large corporates as a strategy consultant and in helping invest in a number of startups, both as a corporate venture investor as well as a traditional venture investor in E4E as a co-founder of E4E. And then now later, I'm helping a lot of corporates actually invest in startups for their own innovation strategy initiatives. So from a talent perspective, I'd say, since about 2011, I led recruiting efforts of the global consulting firm that I worked for. And I've never really understood when someone says there isn't enough talent in South Africa. So just to paint a picture, there's about 26 public universities, of which, there's always a distribution curve. Obviously, some are really, really bad. Some are average and some are really good. I mean, of those 26, about 6 or 7 UCT, Stellenbosch, Wits, are really, really good, world-class universities, multidisciplinary, and produce at any particular point. Those public universities have 1 million students, active students in any particular year. So the business that Jason speaks of, we were essentially funding those students and then running cashless campuses. So at any particular year, we're producing one of the best accountants in the world. Our CA program is amongst the best in the world. We're producing some of the best doctors in the world. Hey, Hannah. I know Hannah quite well.
So sorry, my PC died actually.
No worries.
No worries. We're gonna. Philani's just sorry to interrupt you, Philani. Philani's just started. We're gonna finish with him. If you're happy to hang on for 10 minutes, Hannah, we'll maybe do a Q&A between both of you just now.
Yeah, that's cool.
All right.
It's a bit tricky.
So sorry, I have to go like in 5 minutes max. So sorry for that.
No, maybe you can finish with Hannah, Jason. I'm okay.
Okay. Hannah, I was cool. Thanks, Philani. So just want to throw a quick question at you. We were talking about like how many different countries there are in Africa, each with differing cultural and structural, in a different cultural and structural situation. Do you have any particular advice for UK companies that want to come into quote unquote Africa? Should they go to a particular country and expand from there, or does it really depend on their businesses? Any thoughts would be helpful.
Well, obviously, yeah, there is no yes or right or wrong answer to that. Definitely, you should assess your sector, your business, look at what people on the ground are doing. If there are a lot of UK businesses in a specific country, try to understand what are the winning factors, explaining why they are based there. You have to think about the currency risk. You have to think about the language barriers, the legal system also as a start. And I guess for any UK business, it's probably much easier to start in Commonwealth country, right? From a pure legal system, ability to speak with the people, and a common understanding and common cultural kind of framework. This being said, I mean, if I look at myself, I don't feel Nigeria has been very tough, but I think it has been very tough with anyone who was in Nigeria. And I think if people are honest, a lot of them will tell you that they actually lost money in Nigeria in the past 10 years across all industries. I think Egypt has been very successful for very people, including me. While obviously I don't speak Arabic, I'm not Arabic and stuff like that, but these people are very business driven. So yeah, you just have to look at a few trends and obviously don't go in 100% from day one. Go there often or go there for a month to try to really understand how the country works, meet as many people as possible. The worst thing you can do is just to talk to the UK embassy and the UK Chamber of Commerce and hoping that you get a real good understanding of the country you're trying to penetrate. And yeah, I mean, keep doing exactly what you're doing, trying to talk to various people.
Thanks so much for your time. You've been incredible.
And
we'll catch up soon.
I said that I would finish with just a quick overview. Guys, so sorry. I know I've been a pain for everyone, but I just wanted you to see the type of, can they see you? I don't know if my PC is right. Okay, so there is one British person. Williams, are you happy?
Very happy.
He's very happy. Yeah. So see, come and do business here. And you can see we're not in the forest. We also have very nice places where we can hang out, even in Kinshasa.
Thanks so much, Anna. We really appreciate it, and we'll let you run.
Chat to you soon. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cool. That was awesome. Philani, back over to you. You were talking about talent.
Yeah.
And how we've got some of these students. Yeah.
So I want to echo everything that Hannah's just said, by the way. But back on talent. So essentially, we've got a history of producing really, really great, academic research, and therefore students in very specific areas, finance being one of them, engineering, fun enough, despite the fact that most of our engineers find themselves in finance and they're not solving our power issues at ESCOM, right? Majority of my team where I work now, I'm back working for a global strategy consultancy in growth and innovation in M&A. Majority of my team is engineers, right? So what that has done is, there's also a private sort of higher education market which produces probably another 500,000 really, really talented young people. But the problem is, what you find then is that because of our history, we are uncharacteristic of a developing economies in that most developing economies, majority of people are employed in small and medium businesses. In South Africa, most sectors are dominated by two or three or four very, very large players. This is true in telco, this is true in banking, this is true in a number of sectors. So if these really, really smart young people don't get absorbed in those companies, they find themselves having to find other interesting areas to go into. And this is one of the things I attribute, I suppose, the start of the startup ecosystem, where people like Jason and his friends were like, okay, if I don't get into Investec or into RMB or into McKinsey or into Accenture, I'd rather go do my own thing. So you're finding this oversupply of really, really talented young South Africans, either going to the startup ecosystem or going into other countries, with the UK being being actually one of the biggest absorber of our really, really talented young people, which I don't think is a bad thing. But for the purposes of this discussion, I think because these young people are a lot more traveled than, I suppose, the generation before me, because the generation before me was pre-94. As you would know, we were very closed off to the rest of the world. But these young people are well traveled, they've got global links, they've got global thinking. And because we were closed off before, we built this culture of innovation and solving for the problems that we've got. So the reason I went into the startup ecosystem and left corporate initially was because I felt like our startups have the opportunity to solve and use South Africa as a laboratory to test solutions to problems that exist across the world. And someone will say to me, how is that true? Because you're a developing nation. I'm like, some parts of South Africa are actually more advanced than some parts of London, right? And some parts of South Africa are as poor as some parts of Kinshasa, right? So from an innovator's perspective, and also from a talent and team building perspective, you're getting diversity of thought, because in a team, you can have a guy who comes from the poorest of the poor, someone with my background, and you can have a guy who grew up in Bishop's Court or in Sandhurst who's only seen first world thinking and first world solution. So as you build a team, you are able to start building, either whether you're talking fintech, whether you're talking logistics, to build solutions that can cater for a developed economy and a developing economy. One example of this is that I invested in a business where, again, an ophthalmologist who came out, we've got a very good, as I said, doctor training program where the government actually subsidizes 80% of any doctor that's trained in the country. This guy became an ophthalmologist and realized that he needed to help solve the problem of the fact that for ophthalmology, for specialists and any specialist, they waste a lot of time seeing the wrong type of patient being seen by the wrong specialist. So he built a platform, Vuma Jason. I don't know if you remember Vuma Mobile, where the nurse can quickly ask the different specialist what she's seeing and be able to refer them to the right one, and actually saving the cost of referring to the wrong people. And we thought this was a developing nation solution, because in South Africa, you've got an undersupply of specialists, oversupply of disease, over disease burden, and so forth. And we found that in Sweden, they've got the opposite problem. So this same solution that this young South African daughter built for Africa, in Sweden, that one is because they've got too many specialists who are competing for patients, right? So then the specialists then started having relationships with GPs to say, refer your patients to me and I'll pay you a referral fee, right? So this is what I'm saying, that our talent is sort of, because of the country we live in, you are able to build a team that can understand problems that are applicable to the UK and problems that are applicable to South Africa, to Kenya, and so forth. But beyond that, also, from a cultural diversity perspective as well, I think South Africa is unique in the sense that one of its biggest advantages, Hannah was here until a few years ago, for instance, is that the whole of Africa is actually found in South Africa, right? If you want to understand what's happening in Congo, depending on who you know, you can actually sit with the Congolese community and say, okay, how does fintech work in Congo? If you want to understand what's going on in Egypt, you can do the same here. My new business partner in my new fund is a Tunisian guy who's based here working for a French PE that is doing hotel acquisitions across the continent, right? So that's the unique thing about South Africa. While at the moment it's not necessarily the fastest growing country on the continent, but the talent and the networks and of the rest of the continent you can find here. Whereas in other parts of the continent, for instance, in Nigeria, you will find the rest of the world being in Nigeria, but it's not the rest of Africans who are in Nigeria. Yeah. But in South Africa, the Kenyans are here, the Congolese are here, the Egyptians are here, the Tunisians are here, and so forth. So it gives you a base from which to work from as you try to think about how to expand your business to the rest of the continent. You can already test that with people from those countries who are based in SA. What's the other thing I wanted to chat about? Yeah, I mean, I think it's exciting. I differ a lot with how when people complain about the lack of talent. I think corporate South Africa, as again in each sector, you've got 2 or 3 companies who want to do things traditionally. They're not really attracting the exciting young people. So if a business coming out of the UK is showing a different world and a different way of working, I think you can attract really, really great talent as a business establishing here. Different races. I mean, it's also the only country on the continent that allows anyone to be themselves, right? Gender diversity, sexual diversity, race, everything. It's probably the most free country from that perspective. And then it allows people to be creative in their jobs without hiding who they really are.
Very cool. Philani, epic perspective.
Hey,
I'm gonna throw a couple of quick questions at you, and then if anyone else has got questions, you're welcome to just pop them in the chat, and I'll ask them. Philani, the first thing I wanted to drop by or pass by you was I mentioned earlier before you joined, I think that I get the impression that there's a lot of drive and sort of determination in the sort of workforce in Africa and South Africa, and I think a lot of that stems from the fact that job opportunities are not, you can't just job hop to like well-paying job after well-paying job. Like you really have to kind of work your way up through the system, as compared to a place like London where, if you're not enjoying something, you can kind of coast for a while and then hop over to the next job in 2 seconds flat. And if you don't mind just sharing a little bit of your own story. So Philani comes from his background, I think you were born in Section D in Kwamashu, if I'm not mistaken. Which is a
remember that.
which is a township in KwaZulu-Natal. We have some clapping hands from Thomas. And obviously Philani has done incredibly well. So I don't know if your particular story or has bearing on that, but yeah, any thoughts on like the drive of the people in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I think the history of our country and also the continent is that it has made people quite resilient and creative people, right, and driven people. So my perspective is that the hunger to succeed and the hunger to create something out of nothing, essentially, is probably higher. And again, this is based on some people I've worked with. So if I compare an analyst I used to work at Accenture, right? So if I compare an analyst that I trained from London and an analyst that I was training from South Africa, the hunger to succeed was higher with the African guy. And the African guy doesn't mean African like me. It could be someone who looks like Jason, but someone who grew up here, understands the what we've been through and the problems that we face. I find that there's a lot more hunger here. Where Jason is right is that the mobility of being able to jump from job to job is probably less here. And again, I think it's more driven by the fact that, to be honest, if you start in financial services, Jason, you probably are starting at Investec, RMB, Standard Bank, Absa. And if you do jump, you jump to these only because the market is just not enough. 80% of the market is dominated by those 4 players in investment banking. If you're in consulting today with Accenture, BCG, McKinsey, Deloitte, or Bain is sort of dying because of some corruption shit, right? So at some point you can jump around. It's either you build here or you jump around enough to learn what you want to learn and you go start something, or you go join a bunch of people who are doing something exciting. Because again, if you are going to sit at a corporate, chances are you're going to have to wait for your boss to leave before you can move higher at some point when you can reach a certain level, say VP or whatever, where you say, okay, now I need to jump out and do something. And I think that's why what you've seen is that, at least in financial services, which I know quite well, and consulting, those people are jumping out to start PE funds of their own or VCs of their own in order to create a growth opportunity that they won't find at Investec, or they won't find at RMB, or even at McKinsey, right? So that's my opinion. But people are driven, particularly the people who make it to, I don't know what level of talent we're talking about here, but people who make it to post the high school education, for you to actually even make it there, chances are you've had to jump quite a number of hoops. So your character has been molded already.
Cool. Scott, I'm going to park your question and ask it to Simon at the end, because I think he might be better placed to answer it. Philani, Douglas is asking, hi Philani, what would have the biggest impact on Africa from an investment perspective? For example, tech infrastructure or funding, etc. Any particular thoughts on what would have the biggest impact on Africa from an investment standpoint? I assume, coming from the UK into Africa.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that question, I think maybe by looking at, I suppose, 4 sectors that I think are gonna make the biggest difference. I think fintech or financial services has probably received the most funding from international and local investors. But if you think about what's happening, right? The major trend on the continent is the fact that we're young and we're urbanizing really, really quickly, especially relative to the rest of the world. What then happens when that urbanization happens, right? You need to house these people. So we need smart housing solutions in cities that are very congested. There's not enough space. And then you need to provide power, especially with Eskom. So what are the smart, and it's probably also the right time. The world is talking about renewables. So how can you innovate there, and how do you invest in that? Then you need to educate these young people. And I was in an entrepreneurs retreat 2 weeks ago, and 2 of the people in the entrepreneurs retreat are in education, and they're doing against the negative GDP growth of the last quarter. They're growing at 25% year on year, right? Because there's a demand for good, affordable education. And as people grow and they congest, there's health issues. So how do you provide healthcare to these people in a manner that is cost effective and effective and efficient? Right, and then there's an issue of how do you feed them and how do you get goods and services to these people. So there's logistics, there's food tech, and e-commerce, whatever. So from a sector perspective, this is where I think it's happening. But again, what you are finding is that international investors want to invest sitting in London, in Japan, even, right? And they don't want to necessarily partner with fund managers, at least in my experience, who are on the ground, who understand what's going on. So I think instead of putting in money sitting where you're sitting, partner with local guys who run accelerators here. If this is Junaid, the Junaid that I know, these guys have done incredibly well, the likes of Hannah, someone like myself, I suppose, is partner and say, okay, guys, these are the major trends, but who are the entrepreneurs to back? What are the things? And this whole notion of saying we only want to do impact investing, to be honest, is BS in Africa. Any business that creates a job, yeah, employs people, gives talent opportunity to exercise their talent is impact. So find local people who know what they're doing, give them an opportunity from pre-seed. This whole thing, we want proven ideas with traction. Again, it's BS because there's not enough of an angel network to get those, give up. Someone like Jason, who was UCT, he had to hustle. There was just not enough angel money. So partner with local guys from seed to Series B. and fund local fund managers, or in partnership with local fund managers, to invest in the sectors that I've just spoken about.
Amazing. Philani, super helpful perspective. I appreciate it. Yeah, just for all the people joining from South Africa, it's I didn't realize, but they're 2 hours ahead of us, so they should be sleeping now. So Philani, thanks. We'll let you get back to your kids or your bed, and yeah, thanks for joining us, man. Appreciate it.
Cool. All right, guys. Cheers.
Cool. So our last speaker, Simon, who maybe looks like he should be sleeping right now as well. No, I'm kidding you. You look great, man. So Simon is going to be our last speaker. So very quickly, introduction. Simon Magner, along with his brother Peter, founded Iridium Business Solutions 10 years ago, which you heard me talk about earlier. They're one of our partners. They're an accounting, advisory, and automation firm, which has grown into, I think, a sizable operation at this point that serves a huge swath of tech-centric and tech-enabled businesses. While in practice, Simon delivers a clear-cut professional service in the form of accounting and automation solutions, the magic has always been the team that somehow consistently adds even more value in their advice than in their contracted services. And I speak from experience when I say that. In my near decade of working with Simon, I have still not come across anyone who can cut through the noise and get to the heart of a problem more quickly and decisively than Simon. He's a powerhouse and a wealth of information, and he's about to give us a quick primer on how to get set up in Africa or South Africa from a legal, tax, accounting, and cost perspective. So Simon, I'll quickly hand over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate that. I like to think I've learned a few things along the way. I'm like Jason said, I'm a chartered accountant, and we run a cloud accounting business in Cape Town, and my brother Peter runs it with me. Our team's currently scaled to about 52 people, and we offer outsourced financial management services, advisory on like a CFO level. And we've recently done quite a lot of cloud integration. So we've been doing implementations of software products integrated with various platforms. So that's kind of the space we're in right now. I think you wanted me to cover a couple of areas just around how to set up, Jason. Is that right? And just kind of what that looks like. Cool. So I'll just go on to a couple of points. I mean, South Africa is relatively uncomplicated to set up a business in. The basic framework in South Africa is a PDY Limited, which is a private company, and setting up a company at the moment. I recently set up a PDY, I think last week, and it took about 3 days to register the company and get everything set up and the paperwork back. But I've seen it come back the same day. So from a registration point of view, that's relatively quick. Normally the complications don't come in the initial registration. The complications come from setting up a bank account and getting kind of a profile set up. So as a foreigner coming to South Africa, it's tricky to open a bank account because the banks like to deal with South Africans with a local passport and proof of address. So I've had recent clients who've come from the Netherlands to open up a company. And that's been a bit of a mission to get all the paperwork through because the banks aren't configured for that. So when you try and deal with a banker and you say, open me a bank account, they don't really always know what to do. And it ends up being a lot of paperwork back and forward. And I suppose some of this is money laundering, FICA, compliance, control. I think the key thing here is it can be achieved. It just is a little bit harder. If you have someone on the ground as a local partner, that's normally the quickest way to get past that, because it's not a compliance along the way, it's a compliance to set up. So once you've passed the compliance up front, then everything gets a lot easier. Our tax authorities have also got quite an efficient system. So once you register a company, to get an income tax number for the company, you get that automatically. But in order to get a profile on the electronic platform to do all your filings, they've changed the system last year that you need to have a representative, preferably locally, that can actually be the registered representative. And once you've got that, all the registrations are digital. There's no need to go into branches or fill out paperwork manually. Everything's scanned and digitally done. I think we've done that a number of times. So it's not something that's beyond kind of, management. I think it's just important to understand that. So, if you arrive tomorrow and say, I need a company by the end of the week, That's very easy. But I need to be registered and open a bank account and paying employees. Like, maybe give yourself a little bit more time. So realistically, a month is enough, should be enough time. But the earlier you start preparing things, the easier. But the company is the easy part. If you're owned by a foreign company, so let's say all the shares are owned by a foreigner or a foreign registered company, there is a requirement in South Africa that foreign investment needs to get passed through our Reserve Bank. So the share certificates and those kind of things and the money coming into the country needs to get kind of authorized by the Reserve Bank. We don't talk to the Reserve Bank. It goes through our normal banking channels. So again, the same logic, you need to set up a bank account. Once you have a bank account, they have representatives that talk to the Reserve Bank. And if you don't do it, what the issue really is once you've made money or you are making money and you want to take money outside of the country, it makes it harder if you haven't done the process correctly. So let's say you get a local partner on board or you sell your shareholding to someone else. That process of extracting the money is harder because they might not see it as a capital repayment. They could see it as some other form, and then that's the initial thing to get right. Often what people do is they set up a company in South Africa as a back office because there's lots of talent here. So you want to get a bunch of developers or you want to build up a bunch of engineers who can do the work for you, but it's for a UK or for another European company. Whenever you do that kind of structure, what's important to get right is your service level agreement. Because in effect, it's two separate legal entities. You mustn't see it as another team. It's a separate company. So whenever you're dealing with a separate company, our government has a fear that you're going to shortchange them on tax. Because that's what most people try and do. They try and navigate the tax in the cheapest way possible. So if that's the fear, the way they manage that fear is transfer pricing. And transfer pricing basically says, if we think you are shifting your profits to make the most effect of what you want to do, and it's not fair, they could call you out on it. So in effect, they're saying, how can you only pay R1 million a month across to the South African company when it costs exactly that? Why would you have a company that doesn't make a profit? So the logic is you've got to build in a structure that says it's a cost plus exercise. So if it costs me X to run the business, well, you should be charging a small management fee with the assumption the company makes a profit. But you don't need to make a massive profit. So if it costs you R1 million a month to run, a 5% management fee on top of that as a profit margin is reasonable. It doesn't need to be a massive margin on top. And we all know businesses don't always go according to plan. So that 5% might get lost in all the extra expenses you didn't plan for. And if we look at most companies in South Africa, they don't make a profit. And I think that's probably a trend globally, that typically you find that only sort of 10, 15% of companies actually make a profit. The rest either lose the money or they deliberately don't try and make a profit for tax planning purposes. So as long as you have a service level agreement in place, most people have a transfer pricing agreement if there's a sale of services or goods. And if you get a lawyer to draft that or you put it in place, you're really just covering yourself in case something goes wrong. And any structuring or setting up admin processes to try and avoid something going wrong. Not that you expect it to go wrong, because you're always thinking, what happens if someone knocks on my door and says, what about this? You just need to be able to show them the paperwork and say, look, I've covered myself. This is what we've done. This is our agreement. And then nothing goes wrong. Because often once you get going in the business, you don't have time to kind of backtrack or rethink. And you don't really want someone making your life difficult. So as long as you've set the basics up and everything works really well, it's not a big issue. And if you're recovering costs, there's obviously a need to send invoices. So I know in the UK, if you are kind of if there's invoices going back and forward, I think there is some reverse VAT charges that happens. I'm not a big UK tax expert, so you'd have to speak to someone on the ground there. But I know if there is a recoupment for services where a UK company is paying an SA company, I think there is something like a reverse VAT or something like that that goes on, where in the UK you've got to pay some of the money back there. But then in South Africa, you're refunding the company for doing services. So there is a bit to understand there. But practically speaking, if you've got a deal in place, you're paying money down. It's not a loan. A lot of people start the process out without the paperwork and they just lend money. But if you lend money, it's sometimes harder, to get the money back because you're never going to repay it because it's used for operational costs. It makes sense to just be a charge where the South African company is going, we need X amount. They send you an invoice, you pay them that amount. rather than racking up a big loan account, which there's never an intention to settle in the future. So those are just the kind of initial thoughts normally. Sometimes it helps to partner with a local firm if you're doing something, if that's your intention of structuring it all. Other times it's easier just to run it as your own company and operate like that. And I think the model you want to operate with is probably a discussion you want to have when you get to that. But the nice thing about accounting, the way it works at the moment, is accounting is accounting. And income and an expense is globally understood. Debits and credits are universal. There's no real fundamental issue. And most accounting software is cloud-based these days, which is what we work on, which means if you're sitting anywhere in the world, you should have access to that data. So there's no need to have a local computer and a backup and files saved and stored. They're all sitting on redundant AWS cloud servers globally all around the world. You can access that data whenever you want. You could have someone doing it wherever you are in the world, or you could have someone locally doing it for you. And the only thing that you definitely want someone doing locally is your tax filings, because tax is always specific to the country. So if you're doing a tax filing in South Africa, you want someone who kind of knows what they're doing. But the actual accounting you can do anywhere, because the accounting is not complicated. Payrolls are very localized. You always want a local payroll product, because taxes are specific to the country. But outside of the payroll taxes and the sales tax returns you have to do, there's only the annualized income tax return, which is pretty common across the world to do. And then preparing annual financial statements are a requirement, I think, in most countries, that you make your income tax submission on an annual basis. So I think it's pretty generic from a tax point of view. Your monthly payrolls and taxes, your sales taxes you have to do, and an income tax on an annual basis is pretty much your standard. Most South African companies don't get overcomplicated with employee benefits because it's actually just not worth the admin. So I think most South African companies will encourage people to go on a private medical aid because our government medical aid is not amazing. And private medical aids these days are pretty much all people pay directly. Some companies like to collect money and pay across the medical aids. It's not really worth the effort in my mind. If you want to contribute towards it, give an employee money. But because these days, if we're honest, most employees don't last long at a company. 5 years is seen as like a lifetime. If I keep an employee for 5 years, I feel like I've done a good job. Back in the day, getting a watch for being somewhere for 25 years, that just doesn't happen anymore. So I think if you think about the practicalities, you don't want to be taking on a whole lot of admin of setting people up on medical schemes and pension and provident schemes where they're going to leave in 3 or 4 years' time. So most people opt for the private thing where I'll help you out and contribute, but it's all your problem from a management point of view after that. So it makes it a lot easier. So the payroll is relatively simple and we just move forward from there. So that's the kind of the high level principles there. Really quick to set up payroll. If you started a company and you wanted to get going by the end of April, we can, once the banking and the profile of the tax authority is set up, payroll is very quick to run. It's really easy to do. And if you're employing South Africans, you want them to be on a local payroll system because it makes their tax compliance easier. As soon as you start paying them a consulting fee from overseas, they might like it in the short term because they're avoiding paying tax, but it does actually add a layer of complexity to their personal taxes down the line. And as an employer, you probably want to make it better that you're actually on a local payroll system paying them because you don't have to worry about that kind of management concern for them or for you down the line. So I think that's like a high level framework, Jason. I'm just going to see if there's anything else I wanted to add in. Yeah, I mean, I think other than that, I've seen a lot of companies come over here recently. Like a lot of Dutch companies have opened up, and I think a lot of UK companies like working with South Africans for the reason that you mentioned earlier, that we're hardworking, we get stuff done, and we actually understand things pretty well. And I think we've got a pretty good grasp of English. There's a good communication, like link up, and the time zone works well for Europe as well. So we're pretty much aligned on a time zone. A lot of guys, if they're looking for back offices, they used to go to like India, Pakistan, other Asian countries. The time zone is quite a difference, and the English language is not always at the same level as South Africans and other African countries. So I think that those are your main kind of thoughts.
Cool, Simon, super helpful. I'm going to throw two quick questions at you. So the one is, for UK businesses that want to, say, dip their toe in the water, for the sake of, you were talking about, having a back office in an African country, potentially South Africa. I mean, one of the things that we've heard from UK companies is that they're particularly interested in the cost differential between a place like London and a place like Cape Town, where you're talking about like 2, 3, 4 times less expensive to hire in those places. So if there's a UK company that, for example, would like to start getting a bit of a back office set up, but just wants to dip their toe in the water, they just want to kind of get 2 or 3 people in a satellite office at a co-working space, for example, and kind of start. What kind of, I mean, do you have any kind of thumbsuck costs or timeframes that might be, I mean, is this an easy thing to do? Or is that like, yeah.
No, pretty uncomplicated. So, I mean, depending on what industry you're in, in South Africa, if you're hiring like let's say a non-developer, because developers are a separate breed of people and they seem to warrant like big salaries. But if you're hiring people doing administrative type roles, sales type roles, general management type roles that are relatively senior in a South African team, 50,000-60,000 Rand a month is a good salary for a South African. And you're only talking 2,000-3,000 pounds there a month. And if you go to the UK and you look at a junior entry-level accountant as an example, straight out of university, 2,000 pounds is kind of like seen as like the cheap employee in the corner who does the photocopying. So I think you go pretty far with that. Co-working spaces are really cheap. I mean, I've got 2 colleagues working at a WeWork in Joburg right now, and I think their invoice for last month was like $300, $250 for 2 people for the month. And that was for 2 desks and the general usage space. So from a Rand point of view, it was like 5,000 or 6,000 Rand. It really isn't nothing cost from my point of view as a South African. So as a foreigner, that's really a nominal cost to pay. So if you wanted to set up an office with a few people working in a co-working space, you buy them a few laptops, and that's not expensive. I think we can all afford to spend a couple of $1,000s on a few laptops. I think I bought a MacBook Air last week for my new marketing lady, and it cost me 18,000 Rand. So that's not really much. That's $1,000. So that's a pretty cheap kind of cost. So I think if you needed 2 or 3 people to be doing a basic back office function and supporting your team, you could do it very easy. You can set it up within a month or so. And if you're not having a fixed office with too many kind of admin overhead costs, there's no reason why you can't be doing that with literally a 10%, 15% admin add-on to the salary bill. So depending on what you want to pay people, if you're ending up paying, let's say, 150,000 Rand for 3 employees, you're easily going to get away with like sort of 160, 170, overall costs. Let's round it up as you're really generous and you like to pay for lunches. You're probably getting an under 200,000 Rand. And that's 10,000 pounds a month. That's not a big number, for running a team of 3 people. And these are university qualified people at that number. You're not getting people with an A level and an O level and they've just walked out and they don't know what they're doing. This is a competent person, probably in their late 20s or 30s, who's able to help you doing a job, and they're going to be pretty efficient at what they're doing. Yeah, and there's also a big thing that if you see a need for people to come and work with you overseas, it's a lot easier if you've employed them in South Africa to transfer them to an overseas office. So I've seen a lot of trends recently where people have hired guys in South Africa and they go, you know what, I actually want you in my Amsterdam office, my London office. Now that they work for you in a company, it's a lot easier to get a visa to shift them overseas because they're actually now part of your group. So transferring within a country is transferring within a company is a lot easier than employing as a brand new person and getting them visas for another country.
Cool. Another or a last question on this, unless there's any sort of burning ones from anyone. But Scott, you asked just now. You said if doing business across the continent, is there a suggested place for ease of corporate formation and banking? Simon, I know that most of your experience is in South Africa, but I'm sure you've touched other countries around Africa. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be in South Africa and you're trying to operate with South Africans and build value in here, I think it makes sense to be in South Africa because it's practically easier. If you're looking to build IP and you're looking to get foreign investment and you want to work with the whole of Africa, often people go to Mauritius because Mauritius is easier to navigate with other African countries. So that there's often that kind of thought that go to Mauritius, lower tax rate, easier to engage with other African countries and move money around and have other offices. But normally that's seen as like a head office, because Mauritius doesn't really have a lot going on other than nice beaches and head office offices. But it's a bit like a Cayman Islands or like something like that. You go there because there's efficiencies in setting up a head office, but you're not really going to go and employ 1,000 people to work for you there if that's your goal. But if you want to engage with other African countries, it can be a practical way. They often deal in a lot of dollars. They've got a lot of overseas banks that have set up offices there. So it's a popular way to do things. But you must see that more because you want to engage with 3, 4, 5 African countries, and that's a nice way to move around. If that's not your goal and you only want to focus as a back office in South Africa, there wouldn't be a lot of logic in that. I don't think there's a good call for that. But if you needed a place to move from, people often come to South Africa because it's a good starting point. And when they see the practicalities of needing to engage with Nigeria, Congo, North Africa, that's, I think, when they like to go to Mauritius and say, well, that's an easier place to shift funds. And then if we need to engage with someone, we can use that as a, structuring. If there's no IP involved, then you don't really have to worry about South Africa from a tax point of view. Most people go to Mauritius because they see it as a nicer way to hold an IP if they're building an asset. But if you're an overseas-based company, you're probably building an IP in Europe anyway. So you shouldn't have to worry about how do I shift the assets out at a future point.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a fair answer. Cool. Thank you. So if anyone else has got any questions, please chuck them in the chat. In the meantime, before we quickly wrap up, I just want to touch on what we mentioned earlier. So the whole point of this, as we mentioned, is that we're trying to help you guys get stuck into Africa or South Africa in whatever capacity you're hoping to. In line with that, this is our first webinar, kind of really testing the waters. As we said, we intend to do more over the coming months, and we are doing a 3-day QCX excursion to Cape Town in South Africa from the 17th to the 19th of April. So this is basically anyone who just wants to get boots on the ground, take 3 days. You can still work remotely. It's not going to be back to back, but basically boots on the ground. We'll introduce you to everyone that you need to know, take you to all the co-working spaces, really just get context. Of course, go and have a beer with Simon. I'm sure he'd love that. And a few of the other partners we've talked with earlier. Maybe be able to meet Philani and Hannah and any of the others and loads of others. Basically, our entire network across South Africa. So yeah, and obviously in addition to that, the intention is to do a series of workshops and events, and of course enjoy some of the best wining and dining South Africa has to offer in the Cape Winelands and all across the Atlantic seaboard. So we've partnered with a few people to get all the costs super under control, and yeah, we've managed to get the cost of the entire excursion down to £399 per person, including accommodation, the transport, excluding the flights from the UK, all the food, all of the excursions, events, everything. So I mean, it's really as low cost as we could possibly make it. So we'd love to have any of you attend. We'll pop you an email shortly with some more details, and obviously in the future webinars we'll provide details as well. So we'd love to have your attendance there for your own purposes, of course, hopefully some selfish purposes that will ultimately result in hiring and in Africa and some FDI stimulus into the African economy. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you guys. If you've got any questions, comments, anything, please feel free to pop us an email, and we'll be in touch. Cool. But other than that, Simon, thank you for your time. I know it's super late. Thank you to everyone for joining, and yeah, we'll see you again next time. I'll hang around for 10 minutes after this if anyone's got any questions or comments. But thanks to everyone for attending.